Yeah. He's not saying it.
Good evening, everyone. My name is John. I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are here in Treaty 1 territory, and the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Inuit, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Worcestertown. We are gathered here today to celebrate the launch of Prosperity Ever, Depression Never, Steinbach in the 1930s, the latest work of history from Ralph Friesen. Before we begin, I would like to invite up Conrad Schliss to offer a few words from the book's publisher, the Manitoba Mennonite Historical Society. Please join me in welcoming him.
Hi, it's good to see you all here on this nice evening. I serve as the president of the Manitoba Mennonite Historical Society. The Historical Society has been in existence since 1958, promoting the history of Mennonites in the province. We've done that through the establishment of museums, conferences, tours, and publications. And we're very pleased to support Ralph in his latest project, Prosperity Ever, Depression Never, as the publisher. Thanks also to the other supporters like the Plett Foundation and some other anonymous donors. But of course, the biggest thanks goes to Ralph for all the hard work he put into writing, researching, and editing. And thank you for coming and supporting not only Ralph, but the exploration of Mennonite history. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Conrad. And now, just to give you a sense of the flow of the evening, we'll be starting with a reading and presentation from the book's author, Ralph Friesen, who's now standing to my left. And following that, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions. If you're one of those people gathered here today at the Q&A time, please just put your hand up and I'll approach you with this microphone. That ensures that your questions are audible on the live stream. And if you are one of those people watching on video, please just put your question into the chat and we'll put them to the author as time permits. And following the Q&A, we'll move along to the signing and I'll review the details of that in just a moment. Just to offer a few very brief words of introduction about Ralph Friesen, our author. He was born in Steinbach, Manitoba in 1945, the youngest of 6 children. His father was a minister and a bookstore owner, and his mother a quilter, known for her stories and laughter. After graduating from high school, he worked for a year as a sports reporter and columnist for the Caroline News. Ralph has master's degrees in English, literature, and marriage and family therapy. He has published short fiction, poetry, reviews, and historical articles in a variety of magazines and periodicals. He is the writer of a family history entitled Abraham S. Friesen, Steinbach Pioneer, and a history of his hometown entitled Between Earth and Sky, Steinbach, the First 50 Years. He has also published a biography, memoir, called Dad and Me. Ralph is married with 2 adult children and 5 grandchildren and lives with his wife, Hannah Hoffer, in Victoria, BC. He is retired from his family therapy practice and devotes most of his time to research, writing, and playing tennis. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Ralph Friesen.
I came up here prematurely. I think I was born at the right time, though, not prematurely. So, willkommen, bienvenue, welcome. Ins cabaret, or cabaret, to cabaret. This is not, I don't know if you ever saw that movie, but if you did, this won't be that. But I'll do my best to entertain. When it comes to question time, you should know, and this also gives me a time to complain about my health. And how many times you get that chance? And, you know, I have kind of a captive audience, they have to listen to you fetch. My ear closed on the flight in and it's still closed. So I will hear you, but you may have to speak clearly at that point. Also, this is an announcement I'm not supposed to make, but if you are interested in my previous book, Dad, God, and Me, and somehow missed getting it, speak to me later. Okay. One person here tonight is Yvonne Rembo. I'm singling her out, but she doesn't want to be singled out. She was actually Yvonne Friesen, and she is a descendant of well driller Friesen, Friesen. So I'm going to start with the story of Friesen, who lived on the corner. Like one of the chapters in this book, like kind of the core chapter, is Main Street. And I go from north to south, where some people argue about the direction, but I think it's north to south, to talk about and give some explanation of and tell anecdotes about each of the businesses and families that lived on the street. So we have to begin with C.K. Friesen's because they lived on the corner just before the official settlers' lots began. A triangular lot at the corner of what would later be Highway 12 South and Town Line Road belonged to Cornelius K. Friesen, sometimes known by the Low German nickname Bormstädter, well rammer, Friese, in recognition of his trade, or also known as Friese, following the German pronunciation of his initials. A tributary of the village creek ran through this property with a bridge across it. Originally, from the neighboring village of Blumenau, Friesen started well drilling in 1892 at the age of 15 and gradually built his own business. The early technology did not involve rotary drilling, but rather a derrick ramming a heavy bit made of cast iron into the soil repeatedly. Sounds kind of brutal, but that's how he did it. And it worked. He made all kinds of wells. Friesen was a nonconformist who had occasional run-ins with the elders of the Kleine Gemeinde, who were struggling to keep out sinful influences of the larger world. They at first tried to prevent members from owning cars. Friesen bought one. He was, quote, rebuked and admonished by the Gemeinde to get rid of it, but he did not comply. His wife, Katharina, also a Friesen and the daughter of Cornelius' first cousin, was exceptional in her own right, a vegetarian, who as a grandmother attended the Steinbach Bible School. She was already a grandmother and she started Bible school. She got her diploma in 1940, having, quote, persevered with endurance and industry. The teachers said about her that she was often an inspiration. She had hoped to become a missionary, but this ambition did not materialize. Katharina Friesen's boldness in attending Bible school seems to have evoked some gossip among the locals. There was a letter to the Steinbach Post from G. Siemens. I've not been able to track down who he was, actually, but he wrote a letter to the Post in which he suggested that C.K. Friesen might have sent his wife to Bible school so he could have some peace at home. Siemens might have meant that as a joke, but Friesen was not amused and wrote a rebuttal. This is not true, but many people have the false impression that we are living in strife. Not so. But the Bible school does bring us peace and joy, and I believe it would do many others good if they would follow our example. After my wife has come home from school and looked after the house and housework, we sit down in an agreeable way and she talks about what she learned during the day. We talk about things, sometimes read things, and so in the most peaceful way, the evening passes. Friesen's piece had a sharp edge to it though, revealing a townsman's bias toward poor bush farmers. This is a continuation of the letter. Siemens wants to spend the winter in the forest. I do not know, does his farm not bring him enough income to support his family? As he said, he wanted to catch squirrels for food this winter. Whether he wants to play trapper and sell the pelts or eat the meat, I do not know. In any case, I wish him luck and peace in the forest. So the local newspaper was quite hot at times. I'm continuing on Main Street here for a bit. So now we're going much further south to the Red and White store owned by Peter B. Reimer and Sons. This was south of the lumber yard, so south of Lumber Avenue. Before it was known as the Red and White store, it had been known as the Steinbach Meat Market, and the owner acquired the moniker Butcher Reimer. Reimer married twice, two sisters Helena and Katrina, daughters of Johann Miller Friesen. You have to keep all these names straight, and I'm going to examine you at the end. The main lesson taught to all of the numerous offspring was the value of hard work. Reimer, quote, despised sloth and lack of ambition. Accordingly, it was, quote, by dint of sheer back-breaking work that he and his family managed to keep their business afloat during the Depression. He possessed a physical constitution of iron and an iron determination to succeed, all built on the foundation of old-fashioned biblical principles. His eldest son, Frank, thoroughly assimilated this inheritance. We're now talking about Carlo Frank, who founded Reimer Express, the international transport company. Frank got married in 1928 at age 20, and it was another 12 years before, quote, he found enough time to take a few days off for a honeymoon. His Herculean exertions were the stuff of legend. He'd get up at 5 a.m., haul produce to Winnipeg, and return at midnight. According to his brother-in-law, A.D. Penner, Frank had to load the truck by himself, peddle the produce all day long by himself, all over Winnipeg, then load the truck again with freight for home, again all by himself. He used to haul feed from the brokery, and he would haul up to 10 loads of 100-pound sacks and do it all by himself. So the repetition of all by himself denotes a radical self-sufficiency that fellow citizens admired and held up as an ideal, even as Canada, as a country, was developing social and economic models of cooperation and interdependence. On a corner of the Reimer property was a small red building serving as a slaughterhouse. Here, Glenn Kaler would sometimes, Glenn was just a boy at the time. Glenn Kaler would sometimes watch Frank Reimer working, quote, as if he was driven by some supernatural force. A couple of times a week after a long day in the store, Frank would fire up the stove under the hog scalding tank, drag a couple of squealing porkers into the slaughterhouse, and in short order, they were reduced to sides of pork, ready for the meat counter next morning. I must have had a premonition as to when this spectacular event was to take place, and I would run over and watch through the slightly ajar door. Frank would also butcher beef and veal in the same manner, always working alone, which was the way he wanted it, because he worked very fast, and anyone wanted to help would only get in the way. Many years later, whenever I would see a sped up movie reel, I'd always think of Butcher Reimer France at work. More than anyone, perhaps, P.B. Reimer and his eldest son embodied the intertwined religious and work ethic that drove Steinbach during the Depression. The underlying psychology signaled that a good citizen needed to earn his status, that whatever he had done, he had never done enough, could never rest on past accomplishments, and every day presented the obligation to prove oneself again. Ultimately, it would not be the grocery store, but a trucking business that flourished in future years as an international company, Reimer Express Lines. In the chapter on religion, I have taken an excerpt from a story by Charlotte Reimer Kennedy. She was actually a daughter of the same Peter B. Reimer and Frank Reimer's much younger sister. So Charlotte wrote this piece in Low German and called it Sorgespann, sawdust. And it'll become evident as to why she called it that. Her story is narrated by a nameless 10-year-old girl in an unidentified Mennonite village, which it can be assumed is a version of Steinbach around maybe 1940. The physical details of place and character are quite close to Kennedy's actual circumstances as a child. She was born in 1930, the daughter of P.B. and Katharina Friesen Reimer, a powerful business family. For convenience, we may call the narrator Charlotte. Little Charlotte is stricken with fear as a summer thunderstorm crashes around her house. To her, the storm is a sign of God's anger with her for cutting her hair. Impressed by the shiny curly hair of the English doctor's wife, Charlotte had hit upon a plan. She'd snip off a bit of her braids each week, and nobody would notice. The violence of the thunderstorm literally put the fear of God into her. Quote, "To cut your hair for us, that was no small sin. After all, the Bible clearly said, clearly and exactly, that girls and women should have long hair to the glory of God." So I hope my cousins are listening because I see their hair is not that long. Charlotte, afraid and remorseful, resolved that she will confess her sin at the next Wednesday evening meeting held in the big tent set up behind the Reimer orchard. And I'll have to check with experts here to see if there actually was a tent set up behind the Reimers. But anyway, in the story, there is one. Different streams of religiosity collide in this scenario. On the one hand, the requirement for a girl to keep her hair long and braided was a dictate of the patriarchal Mennonite tradition of Charlotte's ancestors. On the other hand, the tent meetings were a manifestation of evangelical fundamentalism imported from the United States. Just happened that the traditionalists and fundamentalists agreed on the point that women should be the exemplar of modesty in an evil world full of temptations. Women, including young girls, were duty-bound to hide their sexuality and beauty lest men be drawn into sin. At the tent meeting, the self-absorbed, this is a fictional character, Mrs. Cornelson, prays at length, her voice rising ever higher while the elders try to bring this exhibition to an end with a series of amens. Then an unholy racket is heard from outside, prompting preacher Dirksen to strike himself on the head with both hands and scream, "The world is ending." At first, Charlotte is terrified, but then she identifies as the noise as the squealing of the family pig, which her brothers have hitched to a homemade buggy using her father's suspenders for reins. The narrator cannot help herself. Quote, "I started to laugh so hard that tears poured down my cheeks." This is subversive laughter. And for the young girl, a liberation from her guilt and fear. But these feelings return when she goes home and meets her mother on the back steps of the family home. But here again, she's reassured when her mother admits that she laughed too. A distant roll of receding thunder now becomes the voice of angels, joining in the laughter at the antics of the Reimer boys. The story ends with some ambiguity. The narrator's fears have been dispelled with the knowledge that her mother does not condemn her, although her mother does tell her, after all, to let her braids grow. Presumably, young girls must learn to go along with religious rules for the sake of social harmony. Behind the scenes, Charlotte's father lies in his sick bed, unaware of the struggles of his daughter or the crazy behavior of his boys. Elsewhere, Charlotte Kennedy characterized her father, a hardworking grocery merchant, as strict, demanding obedience. But here a spirit of irreverence breaks out. beyond even his control, mischief and laughter undermine the patriarchal authority and open up the possibility of a freer life. In actuality, most of the P.B. Reimer's sons went into business and adopted the very fundamentalism being spoofed in the story. Charlotte herself, married a non-Mennonite, lived in Winnipeg, far away from the constraints of her home village. This part is from a chapter on arts and sports, and we're choosing the arts here. I should first say that arts and sports were a contentious thing in this community at this time. I mean, they both existed, and they were both regularly opposed by the different churches to varying degrees, depending which church had trouble with which event. So there was an ongoing tension in the community. It was predictably the young people who were interested in these fields. So piano lessons were offered in Steinbach's. The piano itself as an instrument was object of contention. Piano lessons were offered in Steinbach starting in the previous decade, perhaps beginning with Russlander. Someone was looking for mentions of Russlander. There's one, Russlander, Peter Hies. This is the father of a woman who became Olga Friesen, the wife of Ed Friesen in the J.R. Friesen clan. So Olga's dad, Peter, once a wealthy flour mill owner in Ukraine, put an ad in the Steinbach Post in 1924. He was teaching piano. More ads appeared in the 1930s, by which time a number of locally taught children were taking lessons from Bill Weiss, son of the Lutheran minister in Friedensfeld, through the Toronto Conservatory of Music. In 1934, the first local music festival with adjudicators was held. In the following year, when Reg Wetter came to Steinbach to serve as a physician, he brought with him his wife, Ruth, a trained vocalist who both performed and taught, and encouraged her students to expand their repertoire beyond hymns. One of her students said she was just what Steinbach needed. Businesses regularly sponsored community cultural events. Several high schoolers speaking in both English and German gave presentations at J.R. Friesen's warehouse in April 1930, with Linda Reimer being brave enough to tackle the theme of, quote, the equality of men and women in all occupations, for which she won a prize from the all-male panel of judges. A play called A School Board Meeting was also presented, dealing with the question of German or English education, a question which already had been decided in Steinbach in favor of the latter. Friesen's garage was again the venue for another speakers contest that fall, sponsored by the Canadian National Railway. Brother Joseph, the principal of Provencher School in St. Boniface, and a few other ladies and gentlemen of high standing visited Steinbach as part of a national program to learn more about the country and people. Frère Joseph spoke approvingly of the religious and pious attitude in business, school, and home. Friesen's warehouse, the largest space available for such events, was full of locals, quote, closely pressed together. They sat there, young and old, men and women with modest demands and high hopes. In addition to speeches, there were musical performances, concluding with a lively march. Steinbach Post editor Arnold Dick approved of a private company sponsoring such an event, comparing this with the situation in his former homeland of Russia, where, quote, such initiatives are undertaken only by the government and people are forced to participate. That a Catholic priest addressed a Mennonite audience, perhaps the first time this had happened in Manitoba, passed without comment. Time to take the audience pulse. So this is kind of the time in my own mind where I'm saying I've read enough, and actually there's a book that you could read. But if you want me to read one more, I also will do that. I see a yes. Bless you, brother. Yes. Now I have to decide what. This is fairly short. There's a chapter on power in the community, and this is a section on women. So, I mean, it wouldn't be a surprise. I mean, Steinbach, maybe as a Mennonite community, this would be more clearly seen, but I think generally in Canadian society at the time, it was the men had the power, and they ran commerce, and they ran the business of the town. Women also, of course, had their part to play. In general, they did their assigned part within the existing division of labor as wives and mothers, as described by teacher Mary Cornelison. This is from Mary's book. Quote, by the time they had born from 3 to 6 children, they were generally fairly well-rounded, and their philosophy of life was equally comfortable. They cooked and mended, kept their children clean, helped their husbands in whatever way they could. They also supported the broader community by visiting the sick, often even performing the last ministrations to the dying, and generally spreading good cheer and encouragement. In the case of the church, women might belong to a sewing circle or a mission society, but these were about community aid and not religious practice or member discipline for which the all-male Bruderschaft was responsible. For the most part, female power was indirect, although this does not mean that women were lacking in forceful personalities and personal talents. And not every woman fit Cornelson's well-rounded category. Say, for example, Katharina Vogt, Arnold Dick's wife, from the well-known Vogt family. She fulfilled her duties as a housekeeper and mother, but a part of her mourned her inability to fulfill her professional potential. As a displaced Ruslander in Steinbach, she felt she'd lost her identity. I was a teacher. I was independent. I had a reputation and counted in the community. Here, I'm no more than a housewife. I'm incarcerated. I don't count anymore. I'm a slave, nothing more. Her sisters Maria and Anna, however, put their early training in Germany to good use as a nurse and teacher, respectively, but they both remained single outside the norm. Some women, including some who were married, started business ventures like Agnes Tave's hair salon or Mrs. Stark's sewing service in the tourist hotel. Mrs. Erin K. Reimer, she's Katharina Schomburg, boldly sold Avon products, quote, face powder, rouge, nail polish, mascara, manicure sets from a location next door to Regere's garage. I mean, you may not know how astonishing this is, because makeup was forbidden, I think, at that time in every Mennonite church. They would have all been unanimous on the subject. But I guess she had a Lutheran clientele maybe, or some Ukrainians, or maybe the odd French Canadian, I don't know. But this is what she did. Mrs. John D. Craker, she was born Esther K. Reimer, granddaughter of the pioneer merchant, advertised her machine knitting service, asking clients to leave their orders at P.D. Reimer's bargain store. Rosie Murrell offered piano lessons from a home on Hanover Street, and in 1938, Mrs. I. Cutler announced that she was opening a music studio also at a Hanover Street address, giving individual instruction at 50 cents an hour. Mrs. Cutler, née Irene Kobrinsky, was the wife of lawyer Erwin Israel Cutler, original name Kotlarski, and appears that her husband lived in Steinbach for a time, she and her husband. Their families were well known in the Winnipeg Jewish community, and their residency signals the brief reappearance of a Jewish presence in Steinbach after the departure of another family, merchant family called Schwartz. Gibt noch es einige Frage. Do you have any questions?
You explain the cover of the book
You want me to show the cover?
and explain it.
Explain it?
Yeah.
I'm requested to explain the cover. Hannah's often asked me to explain even harder things than that. But when you write a book and work with a designer, you have different options for a cover, and we went through a number of them. And the designer has a lot of say in that because they know what looks good and they're putting it together. This is Aniko Savo. So Aniko said, this image is high resolution, and also it tells a story that goes with, and actually I have to say we went, Conrad voted for the burning mill and we nixed that because the burning mill, which is also a picture inside, doesn't suggest prosperity ever, depression never. But how about an airplane? Like, yeah, they're gonna fly. So I think, I think the cover ended up being the right one.
Yes, two questions. You imply that Steinbach did quite well during the Depression, considering, but how did they manage to survive? What was the keys to their success if the Depression didn't affect them too badly? And secondly, you also said that they had this attitude of you have to always keep going, getting better and better,
Yeah.
working hard,
Yeah.
hard. Maybe there's a connection there. And then you said also that that was connected to their faith.
Yeah.
Where in Christianity is this belief that you have to keep going all the time?
Okay, I'll answer the second one first, and then see if I remember the first one. Like, how is that actually Christian? No, ask them, don't ask me, like, I don't know. I mean, work for the night is coming, we used to sing. And how the ethic of hard work being tied to being a good citizen, being a good Christian, developed over time. That wasn't just Mennonites. How that has developed historically, it's beyond my ability to explain, but today, I don't think that theology would be that popular. But it was part of the Protestant ethic, as Max Weber wrote. This is what you do, and I think it goes back as far as our Dutch ancestors. Like we come from these people who felt a compulsion to work hard just in order to survive, and then they didn't know when it was beyond survival and still have, yeah. It's just that it's the kind of ethic of the people from which we originate.
Survive the Great Depression.
Okay, so the thing is, my ear is closed, and you said something that it could have been vital, but
Is that what helped them survive the Great Depression?
yeah. So that helped them survive for sure. Like that, work that hard, and your chances are better. Yes, definitely, it was a big factor. As was the whole physical environment where they had to diversify. farming, like the farming was all diversified because they couldn't just rely on a crop and have your, like, prices go down and you're finished. And in town, they also had big market gardens. So like Mrs. J.T. Lowen of the big Lowen clan would harvest tomatoes and take them to H.W. Reimer's and then get Preistje or whatever from the, like you didn't always need cash.
I'm a bona fide Steinbacher.
Yes, you are, and you're actually in this book.
Now it tells me. You didn't ask. Anyway, to the question that was raised over here, what explains that drive? So while you were talking, I was wondering whether Frank Reimer had ever read Richard Taney. Back in college, I read, the title of the book was Religion and the Rise of Capitalism.
Yeah.
And his responses, I remember, I don't want to write a test on this, was the Methodist revival, I think, was all of a sudden people, when they quit drinking and partying, had money left over. And
Yeah, you get extra cash when you stop drinking. I noticed that too.
well, and he says that had a great effect on these people, a great effect on people becoming wealthy. They would save it, they didn't have anything bad to spend on or whatever.
Yeah,
Anyway, that's it.
I think that's a valid point and pertains here too. Yeah.
I was taught that God helps those who help themselves. So I would regularly go to caves at Five and Dime, and I would help myself to candy, not realizing getting paid for it.
Having trouble with this story.
God helps those who help
Yes,
themselves.
yes,
I helped
Frank
myself
Reimer
to
would
candy
agree.
at Caves' Five and Dime store. And then I was told that I had to pay for it.
Okay.
But no, seriously. It has been said that you can tell what priorities are in a community or in a country, in a society, by the height of its tallest buildings. And there was a time when the churches were the dominant buildings in the village or community. And then the next stage was government buildings, like the Capitol or the legislative buildings. And now the tallest buildings are banks, financial institutions, corporate headquarters, and as you know from your latest visit to Steinbach, the credit union building dominates.
Yeah, I nearly fell on my knees.
Well, I know. I find it personally, having grown up in Steinbach, I find it rather to be an obscenity. So, can you comment on that?
I'll comment on the tallest building. In the 1930s, that was the flour mill, 4 stories high. And when it burned and was quickly rebuilt, like it was part of the core economy of the village. But it had that symbolic importance as well. Look at us, we can build this large structure, and it shows the power of the people who do it. And it also served as a vantage point for photographers, especially Jacob Barkman, who would often, it seems, get onto the roof and take pictures of the town. So some of the best shots of Steinbach in the era are like aerial shots, but they're taken from the flour mill. I don't think there was any danger of confusing it with religion, though.
Sorry about this, a bit crazy, but I would like to see, I'm old, I'm so old, maybe I don't care so much anymore, But what I would like to see
You're way younger than I
is
am.
joy.
Yeah,
Is joy. So now you're writing this book and you're looking at this community, my community
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
At that stage, and there's rules and there's always, no matter where you are, challenges.
yeah.
Where was the joy? Was there happiness?
Oh, my goodness. I mean, Bob, you're asking a question that goes to the heart of so many of our experiences. My great grandfather, Abraham Dick from Kleefeld, preached about joy, but yeah, it was a pretty somber business altogether. There was joy, but I mean, you have to take it. Not everyone in the community was Mennonite, and so like when the Lutherans were joyful, that was more evident. When the Mennonites were joyful, they like made quiet jokes in Low German, like this cautious joy, and so I think the people thought that might be somehow harmful to their well-being to really allow themselves that feeling, as if you, I don't know, as if you'd expose yourself too much, or as if you'd be too proud if you're joyful, like because the world is a dangerous and unhappy place. And yeah, the working really hard isn't all that much. I guess they had fun, but I don't think that quite approximates joy. I'm still thinking, this is an important question. What about music? I mean, let's say EMB Church, Brudotara Church, they adopted a more enthusiastic and more expressive way of singing than the community in general had before then. And I would say that they experienced, that it was fun. They got together in choirs and as a congregation, they sang and they felt joy. Yeah.
Many of us here know that we as Mennonites are people who are proud to be humble. And,
There should be a t-shirt. I'm proud to be humble.
and so talking about character, I'm sure you come across a few characters that have outstanding pridefulness, colorfulness, perhaps.
Yes.
What story might you be able to share with us in that?
Why does A.D. Penner leap to mind? See, again, I'm thinking that this is akin to the question about joy. When you talk about pride and our history and our people, it's condemned in every sermon, or in almost every sermon. Like they go out of their way to say this is an evil that we must avoid. Humility by the obverse is the great value that we should have. And I sometimes wonder why did they fear pride so much? I mean, pride cometh before a fall. There's some obvious reasons, but they really, and I'm sure this was inherited over generations. It wasn't just them. But to stand out, to put yourself on display, to act as if you're better than, and so on, it was not well received. But some people did it anyway, like they couldn't help themselves. And so when you ask about characters, see, not your ancestor, like C.T. Lowen was not like that. He wouldn't have wanted to do that. But again, A.D. Penner, as starting his business in 1937-38, was flamboyant, and he was an early advertiser, like you couldn't miss. what he was doing, why he was doing it. He was that kind of character, and he just became more of that as time went by. There's a brief reference to him in the book.
Ralph, you mentioned about Anna Fogt, who remained single,
Yeah,
and she started a kindergarten.
yes.
And I have a little anecdote, if I may tell it.
I think we'll indulge you. You have earned it.
You think so? Well, I've survived 95 years.
This is what I'm saying. Okay. So Anna Vogt was your teacher?
Yes, I was a 5-year-old and my mother sent me to the kindergarten. It was run by Miss Anna Fogt, and along with about 15, 20 other little 5-year-olds, most of them crying on their way to because they were going to be away from their mothers for the first time. But she had a way of entertaining everybody, and her German little stories and little games and treats and stuff. And the kids all forgot about the fact that they were away from their mothers. This went on all morning in a very pleasant manner until it got to be near noon. And at that point, we all had to sing, "Jetzt wollen wir nach Hause gehen und unsere liebe Mama sehen." And all of a sudden, they all remembered that they hadn't seen their mother. They all started crying on the way home. And that was the end of the kindergarten session for the day. However, that's
She needed to revise that song.
That's great. Oh, well, I want to remind you about your mother. Who laughed a lot, who quilted.
Yes.
That's a joyous thing.
Okay, example of joy. She refers to my mom, and fair enough. Like my mother was fetched from the Kansas farm by my dad in 1931 and brought back to Steinbach. And I think she shed some tears too about being away from, at that age, from being away from her family. But she had, let's call it a joyful nature or a congenial one, or the willingness to laugh at whatever hardship or whatever crazy thing might have happened. And so she had, like, that was her personality. So she's remembered for her laughter, and I guess that's an expression of joy. And I think too that if a group of women getting together and quilting and gossiping, like, what could be more fun? So, sorry, that's a stereotype. I draw that back. Yeah, you didn't hear that. But anyway, group of women getting together and making art with a quilt and talking about what's going on in the community. Joy. Yeah.
I'm proud to call you my brother-in-law.
Yes, sister?
This is my question. I imagine that you did a lot of research for this book. And I don't even know if this is a fair question, but I ask it anyway. I should also mention that I'm an ex-Hutterite. So I'm wondering, did you come across parallels in the two communities between the Mennonites and the Hutterites during that time period? Or did that not arise?
So when did the Hutterites come to Manitoba? That was after World War I. And so there would have been some colonies. I guess Crystal Springs might have been the closest one to Steinbach. But I didn't come across references to Hutterite life or Hutterites coming into town, that kind of thing. So the parallels would have been there, but people were not writing about them or discussing them. That's to my knowledge. Maybe they were, but I didn't find them. Yeah.
I just wondered, and maybe this is a silly question, but the location of Steinbach, as to why that was chosen. We know in the history of Manitoba,
Yeah,
Ukrainians picked a certain area because it
Yeah.
reminded them of homeland and the, you know, the Gimli was fishing and.
why did the
Steinbach
first
location-
pioneers choose this location?
Yes,
That was pretty much all that was left. Like, first of all, like, the larger area of the East Reserve had been set aside by the Dominion government for Mennonite settlement, with a little cutout where Clear Springs was, because we got mixed up with the Scots and Irish and English. But that was actually kind of the same parcel of land. And of course, this was traditional Ojibwe territory, and we weren't mindful of that. But it had been set aside by the Dominion government. I'm trying to remember the number of townships, like a fair chunk of land coming up from. If you think now of, say, Luminort at the northern end to Sarto at the southern one, that's kind of gives you an idea of how it was. The Steinbach settlers came after Luminort, after an earlier Mennonite community, and after Kleefeld. So I think that, you know, this was what was there. And also I think they chose it because it had wooded land all around, and they knew they could use this for building material, and it had water. Too much water, like they had to drain and so on, but there were good sources of water. And some of the soil in the surrounding area was quite good. Some of it was poor. They worked it out. Yeah, so that, I think that's why they chose it. And they just, like, they had, majority of the pioneers had lived in a community in Ukraine called Steinbach. And I think without being all that mindful of their surroundings, they named this the same, because it was like they were transporting themselves from the old land into the new.
I haven't heard any stories of displacement of Indigenous peoples
Yeah.
from Steinbach.
Yeah.
Is that because it didn't happen, or because many stories haven't been told?
I have some discussion of that in Between Earth and Sky, Steinbach's first 50 years, when which is a story about the settlement of the place. But the actual record of that needs to be, like, we need to do more research. It's definitely not because it didn't happen, but I don't know that this territory where the East Reserve was, or Steinbach was located, was, I think it was where the Indigenous people moved through. Not so much that they would stay there, it wasn't like the Forks. Like, so it was the territory through which they moved, and yes, in that sense there. But it needs more research and acknowledgement, actually.
I was bothered by the title of the book, that was very catchy.
Yeah, I was also bothered by it, so.
Yeah, I think you're not metaphoring that depression, you're talking economics, right?
Well, I mean, you have to attribute it to G.G. Cornelsen, because he came up with this model. Yeah, and he's writing in German in the Post, but then in English he writes, "This is our model," starting in 1935, I think. Prosperity ever, depression never. I don't know where he heard that, but he came up with it. So initially I had put this part of the title into quotation marks, hoping that people would get that I'm not actually saying that everything was great in this community. But then design-wise, they threw that out, it got too awkward. And so the nuance was lost. So now people think I'm boosting Steinbach. Far be it from me. No, I give them credit, but yeah, there are shadow sides to the story, as there are to all stories.
It had nothing to do with your counseling profession. Okay, just one comment about why did they choose this land. I have often criticized my wife's great-grandfather, C. Cornelius Hayes, I think he was one of the 12 spies. Why they didn't go to New Zealand?
Sorry, my hearing is not good.
why did the people that went scouting for land from
Yeah.
Russia, why did they didn't consider New Zealand?
New Zealand. I wish they had, but. Okay. That's it.
So we do have time for one final question before we turn things back to Ralph for closing comments.
Well, I think that answers that is quite easy. They got the privilegium, the privileges from the Canadian government.
Yeah.
To preserve their language, their culture.
Yeah, they got a privilege.
Yeah, and they probably didn't inquire of New Zealand.
No, they got a deal. You can practice your religion, don't have to serve in the military. All right, well, thank you so much for coming, and don't go, like linger and stay, and I'll sign some books.
Thank you so much, Ralph. Thank you all for your attention and questions. Please do applaud for that. We will now move along to the signing portion of the evening, so we will situate Ralph behind this table here and he'll sign books for you. Please do feel free to get a book signed before you pay for it. Please pay for the book before you leave the store, which you can do so just with my friends at the cash desk. We're so grateful to all of you for coming here this evening, to all who helped publish this incredible book, and of course, to Ralph himself. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.